Hello, and welcome to show number 2536 of Eyes on Success, a weekly program empowering the visually impaired with expert advice, personal stories, and the latest in technology and accessibility. I'm Nancy Torpey.
And I'm Pete Torpey.
I want to inspire more people in the tech industry to find problems they're passionate about, pay attention to the people who are affected by those problems, and build them better tech tools to help them solve those problems.
And today's guest has certainly been inspiring through his whole career.
We'll talk with Jim Fruchterman, founder of Tech Matters, about his journey from Arkenstone to Bookshare and beyond, the challenges of funding social enterprises, agile development, inclusive design, and why tech for good matters to the disability community. All of which is covered in his brand new book. And we'll be talking to him about the book and its contents. But first, for our tip of the week. This week's tip comes from Jim Fruchterman.
So as someone who's been doing AI for more than 40 years, and as a tech guy who loves tech, my biggest advice is when it comes to AI, wait until there's a product. If there's a product, it means it's been tested. Hopefully there's some guardrails. You can test it and see if it actually solves your problem. And then, because as we all know, AI always makes mistakes, you got to check the output before passing it off like it's your own, because it'll have a doozy in there if you're not careful.
I think everybody's been burnt by that a few times. So, yeah, just as you would proofread anything that you write, you have to check anything you get from an AI source.
And, they're tuned to be super convincing. So even when it's 100% wrong, it's so convincing.
You are listening to Eyes on Success. Success, 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 success.
Let's start by meeting Jim.
Today's guest has been on Eyes on Success a number of times before, and he's always interesting to talk to. He was the person who taught me the term social entrepreneur. So for people who may not remember who you are, Jim, maybe you can tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Glad to share, Peter. So I'm Jim Fruchterman, and I'm a tech nerd from Silicon Valley. And I started my career blowing up a rocket, one of the first private enterprise rockets. And then I started one of Silicon Valley's early AI companies. We were doing optical character recognition, which at that time was at the leading edge of what you could do with artificial intelligence, machine learning. But the socially cool application of OCR is helping blind people read. And, when I was starting this company, we found out about the Kurzweil reading machine and all that. So anyway, we built a prototype reading machine for the blind, showed it to our investors, and they asked me how big the market was. And when I said, I think about $1 million a year, they vetoed the product on the spot. And that led to the founding of Arkenstone, a nonprofit social enterprise, as we now call them, that went into the business of making reading systems for blind people so that they could scan their own books and decide what books they wanted to read. And that led to a long career in accessibility where, I started Bookshare, worked on, standards, accessibility standards, such as the Web Accessibility Guidelines, the Marrakesh Treaty, supported Mike May in the development of Strider, the talking GPS product. And so over the years, I've had a lot of fun building up technology that helps people with disabilities and increasingly helps other fields like human rights or the environment or social justice, whatever it might be.
So having your first company being a commercial company and not being interested in developing a reading machine for the blind was really your launch pad into getting into a whole slew of these social enterprises, and you've become quite an expert at it now, and just wrote a book about what's important. Tell us the name of the book, and then we'll talk about some of the details.
The name of the book is Technology for Good: How Nonprofit Leaders Are Using Software and Data to solve our most pressing social problems.
Support for Eyes on Success comes from our listeners and corporate sponsors.
For more information about airing promotional items on the show, send an email to hosts@eyesonsuccess.net.
This week's focus topic is Jim Fruchterman's newly released book, Technology for Good: How Nonprofit Leaders Are Using Software and Data to Solve Our Most Pressing Social Problems.
In the introduction, you talked about your book. It's a book that's really seems like a manual for how to run a social enterprise company, as well as other companies too, but there are particular things that are special to running a social enterprise company. I wonder if you can tell our listeners what motivated you to write this book.
Well, having done dozens of nonprofit tech projects, social enterprises over the years, I'm often the only Silicon Valley tech guy that many nonprofit leaders have ever met. So I get asked all the time to help people figure out how to use technology for good, hear about their terrible stories of tech projects gone wrong. And so the idea of the book was, well, wait a minute, there's something different about starting a tech company that's organized as a nonprofit, where the goal is maximum social impact, not maximum profits. So let's talk about some of these patterns that I've seen over the years of what works and what doesn't work, highlight it with the story of 60 different tech for good social enterprises that I've run into over the years. And, probably 10 of those are stories of, my work in the assistive technology field.
What impresses me about the book is when you read through it, you think, hey, I'm running this nonprofit organization. That should be easy. I have a bunch of volunteers or even some hired staff. I know what good I'm trying to accomplish. But there are a lot of details that go into making sure this works properly and efficiently. And you go through a number of those things, from different trade-offs in technology, how to run your workforce, your customer base, so to speak, etc. Tell us about some of these issues and which ones you'd like to highlight here.
Well, having started for-profit tech companies and nonprofit tech companies, I can tell you that for-profit companies are easier. At least you're clear on what your goal is. You're trying to make a lot of money. And everybody understands that. People you might want to hire, they're like, great, what's my salary? What are the benefits? And what are my stock options, right? Vendors understand that. Investors understand that. Trying to be a nonprofit tech company just doesn't make sense to people. And so you need to do many of the same things that you would do if you were starting a tech company. Right? You have to focus on your customer, on your user. You have to make them really happy with your product. There has to be great fit there. You have to do marketing and outreach, right? It turns out that the technology is not the tough part. It's getting it in people's hands, right? And then expanding your impact. And so many of the things are the same, but then there's that twist that says, I'm focusing on social impact. So I want to sell as many of this product as possible or give it away, but I have to find some way to be able to pay my team. So, I want to get as big as I can while breaking even financially. Whereas the goal of, a for-profit tech company is, how do I keep my team small and make tons of profit per average employee? And those things actually change how you operate the business, even if you still want to give great service and build a great product.
One difference I can imagine is when you're starting a for-profit business, you line up investors. When you're starting a not-for-profit business, you line up donors. How are they different?
So I often joke that the investor and the philanthropist is often the same person, especially given that I'm in Silicon Valley, right? And these people get really rich and then they might be an angel investor or they might be a donor. And so let's say I go to them and say, hey, I've got this great idea. I'm going to start a new enterprise. I need $1 million to get it off the ground. And wearing their investor hat, they go, oh yeah, $1 million. That's not a big deal. Let me look at this business. And then for a little while, they go, wait a minute. This isn't really business. This is a nonprofit. And I go, yeah. And that's why it's such a great opportunity to make a big difference with your donation. And they go, how about I give you a $50,000 donation? And the funny thing is, I still needed the $1 million. But in their mind, the moment it went from being a for-profit investment opportunity to a philanthropic opportunity, they divided by 20. And so I joke they have two pockets, and the investment pocket is large and the philanthropy pocket is small. And so that's kind of the dynamic is when you're running a nonprofit tech company, you're just often operating with a lot less money than if you were trying to do something similarly complex, but as a for-profit.
So when you talk about nonprofit companies, I'm trying to think of Arkenstone. It was actually in some sense kind of a commercial business. They were selling a product, and it can't always be net zero. What comes in goes out. Tell us a little bit about the difference, what distinguishes the two.
So Arkenstone's a great example, right? I went to the investors of my original for-profit company, and they said, how big is the market for reading machines for the blind? And I said, I think it's about $1 million a year, because that's what I thought Kurzweil was selling when their reading machine was like $50,000, per unit. And here we were bringing in the Arkenstone reader at under $5,000. So big affordability increase. Well, I was wrong about the market size. It was a $5 million social enterprise within 3 years. And exactly, we were, buying products from tech companies like my old company and Hewlett-Packard and Digital Equipment. And we were selling them mainly through a dealer network, majority of whom happen to be people who are blind. And, we made margin on each one of those products. Again, much smaller than I would have made if I was a for-profit company. And actually, after 3 years, we were slightly profitable. We made a slight surplus. But my investors who turned us down when it was $1 million idea would have also turned us down at a $5 million idea. In their mind, those were the same. But a $5 million a year break-even nonprofit, that's a barn burner in the charity sector. And that gave us the ability, when we made a little bit of money, we could add a Spanish version. We could create a low-cost loan program for people who are on SSI. I mean, we weren't using the money to pay off investors because we didn't have any. We weren't paying big bonuses because that's not allowed in a charity. We just kept reinvesting and making the product better. And that's not that different when you do a for-profit. It's just we were never going to go beyond just reinvesting the money in the work because as a charity, there was really no other purpose to making any extra money.
Got it. Now, one of the things you emphasized a lot in the book was the use of technology. And there are some smart ways of using technology and some not so smart ways. And the true cost of technology, the total cost of ownership you kept talking about for nonprofits, that they ought to be very careful about these things.
Yeah. You realize that, most people aren't in the tech business, and that's okay, especially in the social sector. And we used to think of technology purchases as one and done. I bought my reading machine and then I could keep using it for years and I didn't need to pay any more money for it. But one of the things that's happened over the last 35 years is that we've moved from a device-oriented tech world to an internet-connected world. So, Bookshare, to pick an example, is an online platform and it sends, a big check to Amazon Web Services every month to pay for the servers and the bandwidth and the storage and the AI processing power and all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the sort of things I have to kind of tell people is you have to keep in mind that, when you're using a web-based service, there's a meter running all the time and someone has to pay for that meter. So it kind of changes this. And I just suggest people, instead of fixating on what they're paying up front, they think about what is this going to cost me over the next 5 years? And how does that compare to something else I would do over the next 5 years? And pick the one that actually makes that kind of sense over that kind of time period. Now, of course, here I'm mainly talking about nonprofit leaders, because a lot of times we're not writing software for individuals like we did at Benetech. Often we're writing them for nonprofits.
And you talked about some of these ongoing costs being things like support that people don't think about. They think about, I bought the software and that's cool, we'll run with it.
Yeah, and the thing is that the nonprofit sector doesn't pay that well. It's stressful work, and often there's turnover. So the person you trained last year may not be the person who's actually using the software to deliver the nonprofit's programs. And yeah, sometimes it doesn't work that well. So there's always a need to, stay in touch. And then when you're online, there's always threats, there's always bugs, there's, attacks, and you want someone who knows what they're doing to be defending your product and your data against those attacks, whether that's credit card numbers or confidential information about your users. And so, it makes it really powerful. I mean, clearly, most of the AI revolution wouldn't have been possible without being connected online, but it comes with costs.
The other point I thought was really interesting you made was the point about not sticking with some of your legacy, old guard ways of doing things and really making a focused decision on how, when, and if you should change. And you gave the example of recording for the blind. Back in the old days, they were the best way of getting books to blind people by having humans read the books. And then you talked about how that turned out to be an advantage for Bookshare starting.
Yes, it was. And, this whole section is called Kill the Dinosaurs. The idea that something that was great in the 1950s or the 1970s may not be the best thing in the 1990s or the 2020s. And so, I think that in the post-World War II era, recording for the blind was a big breakthrough in terms of getting a lot more blinded veterans and people in school access to books on tape so that they could finish their high school education or go to college. And so that was great for the time, but, they could only produce so many books a year. And so, that's where reading machines came in. It's like, well, it's not available from the National Library Service. It's not available for recording for the blind. But if you want to invest a few hours, you can scan it yourself or enslave your family to scan it for you, right? And so that was a big power shift in the social goods sector. And of course, it didn't stop at the Arkenstone reader, right? We did the Arkenstone reader, for $5,000. And then, we did Open Book, which suddenly, brought the price down by at least a factor of 3, right? So suddenly it became more affordable, more people could get it. And then we moved to Bookshare, where the idea is that, well, let's have all the people who are scanning books share them with each other. And suddenly the cost of getting a book went down by a factor of 50 or 100 compared to what it cost recording for the blind dyslexic to get you a book. Now, the two products are not identical, right? In some ways, having an expert describe the images in a textbook has been a critical benefit of them all along. But if we can have more than 1 million books and you can turn those books into Braille or into large print or into karaoke style reading, which is the killer app for kids who are dyslexic, suddenly, and deliver it not through the postal service, but online, it was like a big leap forward. And of course, as I think you guys know, Benetech's not quitting there, right? They have their global certified accessible, which is trying to get the publishing industry to publish their standard commercial ebooks as highly accessible. And that way, the need for a specialized library like Bookshare should go away over time if the standard ebook has all the bells and whistles that Bookshare is putting in there today.
Right. So that was the way that these books eventually evolved and didn't rely just on human readers, just by thinking of new ideas and then implementing them.
Yeah. And sometimes, in our case, we were innovating and we thought that the ebook was a big leap compared to the audiobook. And then we thought that the shared ebook library was a big leap compared to delivering reading machines. Right. And we made the decision to sell to Freedom Scientific along with, Blazy and Henter, which, that was a pretty wrenching decision. We didn't come to it easily, but finally we went, well, wait a minute. If we get this money for selling it, then we can invent new things like Bookshare. And that is where the bulk of the money to launch Bookshare came from.
The other interesting stories you told were about the old waterfall model of developing new technologies and new ways of doing things kind of sequentially without thinking of the customer first and kind of iterating the whole process. Talk a little about that. I thought that was fascinating.
Well, when I started my career every big company developed its own software, on IBM stuff, right? It was like we write our own payroll programs and we write our own customer management programs and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. We worked at Xerox for decades, and they wrote all their own proprietary software in their own language.
Yeah. And so that was the way we used to do things. Well, first you come up with requirements, a specification, then you come up with an initial design, and then the tech people would build to that design. This might take 3 years. And then at the end of the 3 years, you show up and you say, hey, here's our new product. And often the users went, this is terrible. And so, you just spent probably twice your budget over 3 years getting to the end point, and then you found out that the user hated it. And of course, I started my career in that era. And Silicon Valley, over the last 30 years, has pivoted to where we do things that are more agile, where we're likely to build a prototype and show it to the customers right away. And if they hate it, then we throw away that thing and we start over and we come up with something better. And so this movement from that sort of like one step in front of the other to more of an iterative looping kind of thing gives you the chance to actually pay attention.
Through the years, you've been on a number of boards for social enterprises, and you've run a number of companies, and I guess your latest one is called Tech Matters. Tell us a little about that and what you do. What is your mission?
Well, so after 30 years of leading Benetech, I felt like I was running out of cool new ideas to help blind and visually impaired people. And so the idea of Tech Matters was take the Benetech model and take it to some new fields and create more space for me to promote just using technology for good. So using all the things that I learned 30 years of leading Benetech and apply it in, agriculture and climate change and crisis response. Because these patterns that I saw were repeatable. And so the idea of Tech Matters is, well, let's do it a couple more times. So right now, Tech Matters is working on 4 things. One is the ASAILO crisis response helpline software. So the national child helplines in the world, kind of like 911 for kids. We're writing the software to take them from the telephone era into the texting era and make their counselors able to help. Well, right now it's 40% more kids in the same amount of time, which is pretty powerful benefit from using technology is your same staff can now help 40% more kids in trouble. We also write software for farmers and ranchers and local leaders, helping them identify what kind of dirt this is and how they can keep growing crops there or what crops they should grow while, let's say, they're getting less water or more floods or greater heat or whatever it might be. So those are our 2 big software platforms. We have the Better Deal for Data, which is a lightweight governance model, which is how can nonprofits commit to using your data for good and not selling you out to the tech industry. And then the last part, and that's what my book is part of, and my podcast, and the articles I write all the time, and my karmic consulting practice, where I help nonprofit leaders with their technology challenges for free. That's just part of spending 15 or 20% of my time on building up tech for good generally and trying to just promote it as widely as possible.
Well, you've made some incredible contributions throughout your career and still are a tremendous resource for other people trying to do the jobs that they want to do to help everyone around the world. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you, Peter. And of course, I want to inspire more people in the tech industry to find problems they're passionate about, pay attention to the people who are affected by those problems, and build them better tech tools to help them solve those problems.
You are listening to Eyes on Success. Success, 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 success.
Now for this week's final item, how to learn more about Jim Fruchterman's new book, including how to get it, as well as how to get in touch with him.
Well, Jim, remind people of the name of your book and tell them where they can get it.
So the name of the book is Technology for Good, How Nonprofit Leaders Are Using Software and Data to Solve Our Most Pressing Social Problems. Just been released by MIT Press. And people can find out more about the book by going to my author website, which is fruchterman.org. That's just my surname plus .org. So it's F like Frank, RUCHTERMAN.org. And on the webpage, it lists 8 places you can buy the book, plus your local bookstore. Obviously, I'm doing an accessible version of this, and so it should be in Bookshare pretty quickly. And I also got permission from MIT Press to release it open access under a Creative Commons license 1 year from now.
You said it's available in accessible formats, including on Bookshare. What formats is it available in?
The original format is EPUB, and then once it's an EPUB, then you can turn it into an MP3. You can turn it into a BRF file. It's sort of the core accessible format behind everything that Bookshare puts out and can be transformed into all those formats automatically.
And you mentioned your podcast. Tell people what the name of your podcast is and where they can find that.
If you search for Tech Matters Podcast and my name, Jim Fruchterman, you'll find it. It's on all your favorite platforms. And what I do is I interview nonprofit tech for good leaders about their social enterprise, about their journey as a founder, about what's cool about the technology they're using, whether that's in public health or agriculture or mental health or fighting poverty, whatever it might be. I'm now about to launch season 3, and doing the podcast was a source of a lot of the research that I used in my book.
If people had questions for you or wanted to connect about some of these issues, is there a way they can do that?
The best way to reach me is on LinkedIn, and I'm the only Jim Fruchterman on LinkedIn. And so you can just ping me there with a message or a post or whatever, and I'm happy to kind of engage and talk about how to do more tech for good.
In case you missed any of that information in the audio, you can always find it in the show notes. And this is episode number 2536 if you're looking for the show notes. You can always find that at www.eyesonsuccess.net. And of course, you can always use our search field to look for shows of interest. In this case, if you're looking for shows about Jim and some of the pioneers in accessibility, you can put the term pioneers into the search field and find all of those episodes. Check it out.
That's it for today's show. Next week, we thought it would be fun to reprise a pair of shows that we did about 8 years ago with Jim Fruchterman, along with Dean Blasey and Ted Henter. And he referenced some of the pioneering work that the three of them did in their development of refreshable Braille displays, OCR, and screen readers. We'll learn what each of them was up to as of the time when we did the interview, and at least Jim has moved on since then. And it should be a very interesting show.
And that was really a fun couple of episodes, so we hope you'll join us for that and join the reunion discussion they had. Catch you next week.
You've been listening to Eyes on Success, hosted and produced by Nancy Goodman Torpey and Peter Torpey.
You can access the full archive of previous shows, subscribe to the podcast, and much more by going to our website, www.eyesonsuccess.net. If you have questions about anything you've heard on the show or have suggestions for future shows, send an email to hosts@eyesonsuccess.net.
Thank you for listening and have a nice day.